Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse. What the heck's wrong with you? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. Man, I'm so excited for today. We got a real treat for you. We are talking about compliance leadership redefined. So over the last couple of months, we had shared a link for a survey that Ethico conducted with FTI, the one and only FTI. And we're going to be going through those results today. So if you're an Ethicsverse member, you have probably already seen the report. Hope you enjoyed it, but we're going to be diving deep into that today. Before we get started, as I say every single week, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So drop that LinkedIn URL in the chat. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's get some real emojis going today. You know, we had a round of applause for the Ethico marketing team because guess what? Record signups for today. Almost 3,000 people signed up. So there's a lot of new people here. So let's give them a taste of what the Ethicsverse is all about. Before we get started, I got a couple of quick announcements. You know, I love pushing, thought leadership here. There's so much great thought leadership coming into our space, so many great books, so many great podcasts, and you need to be sharpening your sword or sharpening your saw or just getting better. And if you're not feeding your mind, your mindset is not going to be in the right spot, your outlook's not going to be in the right place, and the outcomes that you're judged by and that you judge yourself by are not going to be what they can be. So you got to come to things like this every single week. You got to be listening to podcasts. My new favorite podcast is the Unless podcast with Hema Lomax. She just had Roxanne Petraeus on of Athena. Really phenomenal conversation. So definitely check that out and add that to your rotation. Speaking of phenomenal podcasts, we had Todd Haw from my old school, Indiana University. He is an ethics professor in the business school. We had a really great conversation. So if you have not checked out the ethics experts yet, or you haven't checked out this episode, absolutely check it out and check out what Todd is doing. He's building a really cool program over at Indiana University. You know, we love giving out books, so we are going to be giving out, I'm pushing this book because we just had Jay on our Tuesday episodes. You know, we do these Tuesday little specials. We had a Tuesday episode this week. So we had Jay on, and we were talking about how compliance officers can better navigate the politics of healthcare. Of course, we love giving away books. We're giving away 5, the world famous Ethico book giveaway is in full effect. We're giving away 5 of these babies today for the best comments in the chat. And you, of course, as every single week is available, you share something on social, talk about how much you love the Ethicsverse, talk about a takeaway from the conversation, and you can double your chances to win. You know, if you're not in healthcare and you're not interested in this, we have dozens and dozens of other books available. So keep those comments coming in the chat. Today's conversation is going to be very organic, as it always is. So drop those comments in the chat, those questions. We're going to keep those coming and working those in. I've talked a little bit about this trend that we've seen over the last, 12 years per ECI, where the percent of respondents who say that they agree that they live or that they work in a high integrity organization has bounced between 60 and 61%, since 2013. So the point is doing, whatever got us here is not going to get us to where we're trying to go. We're reaching this tipping point in our industry. The next 5 years have the potential to be extremely different and feel extremely different and have a lot more effectiveness and a lot more impact than the last 5 years did, but it's going to take us doing something different. So if you are struggling with your current vendor, if you're not getting the speak up rates you'd like, if you're not getting the management participation you'd like, or you just want to deal with a vendor that doesn't feel like they hate you, check out Ethico. We have a really cool promotion, a Promised Land promotion. You're wandering in the desert, you want to come over to the Promised Land. We got a 15% discount. You wonder how much it costs? It's 15% less than what you're paying if you're transferring over from Navex, Conversant, OneTrust, EQS, one of those folks, and up to a year free. So if you have not checked out the ecosystem, the highly reviewed ecosystem, you absolutely should. And I just want to read this note that I got today. This warms my heart. Thank you for having Stacy in your company. I had 4+ meetings with her, but she was a great salesperson. She knew your product well. She knew how to explain things that I didn't understand. She knew what we needed based on the questions she asked. It was like she was reading her mind in every single question based on her knowledge of your product and forward thinking. We are looking forward to working with your company. So I can go on, but we're not the right company for everybody. And that's all good, but hopefully our process and dealing with us feels a little bit different, and hopefully it'll help you find the right solution for you. So reach out to us today and check that out. Okay. Ethicsverse Live. Everyone loves the Ethicsverse. We are taking it live. So we're going to be doing a tour around the country this year, coming to a city near you. So check out the Ethicsverse Live. We're going to have two different types of events. We're going to have roundtables and forums. Roundtables are going to be small, intimate lunches at a really cool restaurant in your city where we're going to get together and we're going to talk about something that folks are struggling with, something that folks are working on. And then we're going to have forums, which are going to be a little bit bigger. They're going to be in the evenings. We're going to have 3 of those this year, in addition to Ethics First Day, which everyone loved last year. So keep your eyes out for those. We're launching our first 2 in Charlotte. And yeah, so with all that said, how's it going? I'm Nick. I'm Chief Servant here at Ethico and host of the Ethicsverse. We have the one and only James Condon on. How's it going, James?
Going great. Good to see you all. Great to be back.
Yeah, glad to have you back. So James is with FTI, and he was, he did a lot of work on this thing we're going to be talking through today, this survey. And let's get one round of applause. Let's see a wash of emojis for the one and only Angie Gorman. Angie forgot her cyborg outfit today, but so glad to see you, Angie. What's happening?
Hey, Nick, nice to see everybody. Happy New Year. Always fun to be in the Ethicsverse on Thursdays.
Very good. All right, so let's dive into compliance leadership redefined. We got a lot to cover this hour, so keep those comments coming. If you see a comment or you see a question in the chat that you really like, make sure you put some reactions on it so that it'll pop out to us more and we can work that in. But with that said, let's dive into this opportunity to change the game. You guys are going to see today that, I kind of mentioned this before, like what got us here is not going to get us there. If we want to have different outcomes, we have to be different. And, there's just so much opportunity as we hit this tipping point. Compliance is not an easy field. We carry the weight of the world on our shoulders in many cases. In many cases, it's very lonely. In many cases, our leadership doesn't understand what we do. Our counterparts in different parts of the organization don't understand how we might be able to help them. And those are all kind of frustration points if we look at it one way. But another way to look at it is that's a massive opportunity for us to make small tweaks to what we're doing that can have a disproportionate impact. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to James, and he's going to walk us through kind of the methodology and some of our early findings here.
Absolutely. Again, great to be here. Actually, a quick show of hands and reactions in the comments here. How many of you tuned in back in 2023 for the first edition of our research?
I see one emoji. So one person.
There's 2.
Just kidding.
Oh. Well, I think, look, we're super excited to bring this to you all today. Nick, team, thank you again for having us. I think for me, it's a very pivotal moment right now. It's when we look at doing a survey, we want to uncover something new. We want to see what the game is. We want to see how things have changed. And when we're talking about compliance, it's a very interesting topic, of course. And I think looking at this compliance leadership redefined study, I would say the sequel might even be better than the original. Angie, do you want to jump on?
We do a lot of studies on leadership at, different positions within the C-suite. The Chief Compliance Officer being just one of them. But, we really think that this is a story of opportunity. And, where we see some real opportunities, or some of the big takeaways that we'll dive a little deeper into here, is, there's an opportunity to really reconsider how you are engaging with executives, with leaders, with managers. There is an opportunity to really bring that middle management layer into the fold and extend your reach, through those people who are more than likely not yet engaged, in your program. And finally, there's an opportunity to, invest in some easy ways in really driving compliance culture. There's a lot of things in your compliance program you have to consider every day, all the time. But cultures are really enabling piece of it that often doesn't get enough attention. So those were things that came out, in the results over and over again. And we'll talk not only about what the results said, but also what are some practical things you can do, to act on these opportunities.
Yeah, and I think to kick things off, I might spend a couple of minutes quickly on this slide, the research methodology slide. I think it's always helpful to understand how we got here and who we surveyed and the opinions this research represents. And building on what Angie said, there's a lot of change happening in the world of ethics and compliance right now. Regulatory scrutiny, external reporting, internal oversight, these are all increasing. But this really does present emerging opportunities for compliance professionals to reintroduce themselves to their leadership and to really lead from the front to change the game, as it were. But to change the game, we have to ask hard questions. We have to redefine how the role of compliance professionals is changing. And importantly, shine a light on how compliance professionals can take an active role in redefining how they are perceived moving forward. But obviously, before we redefine, we need to understand the here and now. What's the backdrop compliance professionals are working in right now? Where do they struggle? What challenges are you facing? Where do you need support? Where are the areas of opportunity? So with all this going on in the world of compliance, the table really was perfectly set to rerun this research and again, canvass the opinions of chief compliance officers and heads of ethics and compliance more broadly. And our respondents, as you can see here, really were truly expansive in nature, working across key global regions, major industries, both the public and the private sector. And quite impactfully, they represent companies with an aggregated revenue of $2.3 trillion and more than 700,000 employees globally. So that's a pretty impressive group. Now, the details, of course, what did we find? Why don't we start at the beginning? A robust and effective culture of compliance really is interlinked and underpinned across every element of a business. One weak link is all it takes to increase risk and drive reputational and operational consequences. And what we're seeing on this slide is, importantly, this message is landing. Organizations are increasingly recognizing the importance of a strong culture in reducing compliance risks. And this has actually seen a pretty sharp increase over the last 12 months in particular. However, there are some cultural challenges that persist. You can see there that just about 1/3 of organizations are increasing their efforts to uphold the culture of compliance. And really what we're seeing here is a very clear disconnect with the broader strategic goals. In fact, I'd go as far as to say we're seeing a bit of a standstill.
Right.
Just 45%, right, see an increase in efforts to assess ethics and compliance over the last 2 years. And just 1/4 conduct comprehensive culture assessments. And maybe to go even a step further, we're seeing 30% claiming that these assessments have decreased or they don't exist at all. This despite the perceived importance in maintaining an effective compliance program.
So, I mean, look at that. I mean, can you go back to that real quick? I mean, that thing on the bottom right is pretty wild. So overall efforts is, only, less than half have increased, and the comprehensive cultural assessments is essentially a quarter. So 3/4 have had no sort of significant change with respect to cultural assessments. So on the one hand, we have this increase in the perceived importance of organizational culture, but not a lot of action, it sounds like, James, to uphold it or to do something different. And again, we're going to be talking a lot about that today. Like, we have to do something different. We can't just keep doing what we've been doing. Otherwise, that 60% line is going to continue on for another 12 years, right? We have to do things a little bit different. And like Angie said, it's about showing up different. It's like a comment I just saw in the chat. It's a process. So we have to have that journey over destination thinking, and we have to really be in that continuous improvement mode. And I think when we can pull in more responsibility to ourselves, we can pull more agency into ourselves. It's actually very freeing, right? Like, there's that saying, there's so much freedom in discipline. If we can be disciplined with ourselves about being focused on the process, having the right mindset, and looking for opportunities to gain a couple of inches, whether that's a better interaction with a counterpart in another department, if it's a different way that we're going to roll out training, maybe focusing a little bit on the end user first. We have to start working in new methodologies to the things that we're doing. Otherwise, this is just going to flatline, and the office of no is going to turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy.
couple of really
Absolutely right.
practical things here. This finding was, culture came through really loud and clear here, that people are recognizing it's more important, but not very many people are actually investing in measuring it and in understanding compliance culture. There are some things you can do there. Some, they're not all easy. Some are easy, some are not. But if you want to affect culture, you really have to connect to the foundations of culture, to the infrastructure of culture within an organization. So that the values is the obvious thing. But performance management, professional development, coaching, all of those things are, how we operationalize culture, and, how do we connect compliance to that? If ethics or integrity is already in your values, that's obviously a great start. But then ask the question, are we really acting on that? Are we talking about it often enough? Are we measuring it? Are we connecting it to performance management by getting some metrics in there that, that people have to fulfill? Those are all things that you can start to do to make that connection between compliance and, the company's values. We worked with one company that put in a very, very simple metric, just about training, just making sure that it was part of people's performance goals, that they had to complete their compliance training. And I was amazed, an amazing difference when we did the second measurement in people's understanding of compliance and why it mattered. Just that one simple metric, because it just had never been connected that way before. So, those
but again,
are some really
that's a great
things.
example of what I was just talking about, Angie. That's a small tweak. That's not reinventing an entire program. That's a very small tweak that has this disproportionate impact. So again, as some people are going to look at all of this and they're going to leave very depressed. Other people are going to look at all this and be like, oh my gosh, look at all of this opportunity here. And I think that latter view is the right view. There was a quick comment here from Patty in the chat. Thanks for this comment, Patty. I hate it that we are believed to be the office of no. We just want to stay on the right side of the line and out of jail. Absolutely. But I think we need to break that pattern. So whether we created that pattern ourselves, which we didn't, or, our forefathers, so to speak, created it for us, whatever, that is the pattern that's out there. That's what people come to expect from us. That's a massive opportunity. Human beings are just pattern recognition machines. And if I'm expecting something to happen and something different happens, then I'm going to remember that. If I expect Patty to be the office of no, and she shows up as a business person who quote unquote gets it, who's trying to help and who's trying to, whose goals are in line with my own goals. Well, now I've just totally reframed this person because this person has really broken that pattern. So I think, again, there's a lot of opportunity to get ourselves unstuck. But again, it's going to take us doing something different, and it's going to take a catalyst. That catalyst is you,
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of quick questions before we go to the next slide. There was one question here. Thanks for this question, Kelly. Did this research include chief compliance officers who might not officially have that CCO title?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then one other question here from Angelique. Hey, Angelique, do the results include ethical culture metrics? They are different from solely compliance issues, especially for state and local government entities. Great question.
I think the answer to that is probably no. I mean, we asked questions about, of chief compliance officers about how effective they felt their programs were, about, their relationships with management and leaders. And so, we did not cover specifically ethics. James, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think gives us some good thinking for a future wave as well. Always thinking into the future.
Yep. All right. So we're talking now about the struggle to implement, but the opportunity that presents. So why don't you walk us through this, James?
Yeah, and Nick, I think this is a nice segue as well. It really underpins what's getting in the way of this connection to Angie's point, that catalyst for change. And this is the sort of level deeper where we start to see some of the challenges presenting themselves. And I think for me, again, I'd love to see reaction in the chat here, but we're seeing 60% saying ethics and compliance is not part of regular business discussions. We're seeing a similar proportion saying that they do not have significant influence to incorporate compliance-related KPIs into performance management programs. And to your point, Nick, as a self-fulfilling prophecy, half believe ethics and compliance are not being lined up to the overall business strategy or those KPIs. So what are we seeing when we take all this into account? We're seeing a real disconnect between compliance and those key performance indicators, and really a lack of influence in strategic decisions continuing to persist. But to me, this is a big opportunity, right? You can almost view it as an extravagant billboard, almost ablaze with light on the Hollywood Boulevard, big arrow depicting the direction to the solution. It's so crucial to look at this issue and see the solution that it presents. And really, for me, it feels like to overcome this gap, the compliance professionals have to redefine themselves as those strategic enablers, to find meaningful ways to articulate the value of compliance to their leaders and drive home the need to embed compliance firmly at the cornerstone of all of these operations.
Yeah,
Nick, what do you reckon?
Absolutely.
There's a great comment here from Michael, sorry if I mispronounced that. There's an opportunity to reframe the discussion from culture of compliance, which can be a dirty word, to a culture of integrity, empowering employees and managers to do the right thing. Again, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a small tweak that's changing one word to define, a program that already exists that can automatically reframe what the angle is, what the agenda is, what the initiatives are likely to be across the organization. And it's these small tweaks that are going to cause these bar graphs to move up significantly, the next time we do this. See, I'm speaking that into existence. How do you like that? Okay. All right, let's talk about this disconnect though between compliance and the business.
Yeah, and I think one of the most interesting insights from this wave of research is certainly that divide we're seeing between compliance professionals and business leaders. Similar actually to what we saw in 2023. Now, what type of disconnect are we seeing? The disconnect is particularly notable in leadership's understanding of the role of compliance executives and the full scope of compliance risks. There is a widespread belief that leadership prioritizes efficiency over effectiveness, which can obviously lead to inadequate resources and a lack of support for comprehensive compliance programs. And this then makes it difficult for compliance teams to address those risks effectively. And in some cases, this lack of understanding of compliance leads to pressure to downplay risks when presenting to the board. Now, that can ultimately undermine the effectiveness of the whole compliance program itself. Now, they definitely do not want to go into these meetings playing down the risk, and then, of course, a week later, there's a crisis. So this really sets the stage for compliance professionals to help guide, to advise, to articulate the role, but also those associated risks.
And, I think there is a general, again, it's hard to kind of trace back, or it's kind of hard to get clarity around like what resistance you might be facing. That could be from a bad experience that your boss had with a different compliance person in a different company, right? Like at some level, it's kind of like, who cares? It kind of is what it is. So again, that creates an opportunity for us to break that pattern by showing up as a business person who gets it. That's not really that hard to understand what's most important to the business, understand what those true objectives are of leadership, and find a way to overlay what you care about with what they care about. Again, doing small things like that can really unlock a lot of this potential. But when when a leader is kind of stiff-arming another leader, in terms of coming on the board, it's due to some kind of a lack of trust. They don't trust that this person is going to show up and not, and like make them look good at the core. So some of that pre-work and some of that, relationship building, some of that brand building, right? Your personal brand matters. Some of that brand building can go a long way to give you the freedom to, have the interactions with, someone who's kind of behind a gatekeeper, whether that's the CEO or some other boss.
Yeah, and I think, something important to keep in mind about that, relationship building takes some time, right? We all have to do it in our jobs. And it's really easy to get bogged down in all the day-to-day firefighting and, all the deadlines that you have to meet. But we do have to sort of step out of that, at least every now and then, and maybe use some discipline to make sure that we do it maybe on, a monthly basis or something to step out of the firefighting and go build those relationships with your business colleagues, with also your other support function colleagues. HR and communications in particular are just as interested as compliance is in shifting behavior and getting people to behave a certain way in the organization. So you all kind of have a shared interest in that. You just come at it from different angles. Those are great partners for you, along with the business. But it takes relationship building. And a lot of times those relationships don't exist because everybody's down in their silo doing their day-to-day. So if you can find the time, if you can make the time, on a regular basis, that will pay off.
Well, I mean, I would go as far as to say that there's always time for the things that are important. And if you're not making time for it, it's because you must not think it's that important. And, there's an opportunity to build a little kind of Three Musketeers. Don't forget that there was D'Artagnan, so there's actually four. But a little Three Musketeers within your organization, between compliance, between HR, strategy, and finance. If you can build that kind of a coalition, because like a lot of those other groups deal with a lot of these same things. They don't get the access to the board they need. They're viewed as a cost center. They're viewed as a kind of a back office thing. Whose kind of value is not as apparent as something as like let's say sales or like marketing like that. If you can build that kind of a coalition, that's really a force multiplier that allows for a lot more impact inside your company. Man, these comments are great. I mean, we could have a whole episode just reading these comments. Keep those coming, you guys.
And while those comments come in, why don't I jump onto this slide? I think the question then that I look at is when we think through in a more of a sharper focus about this disconnect and it's still existing, what's really striking is that this disconnect exists despite the prominence of compliance increasing on the board and the leadership's agenda. In fact, the data here says 50% of compliance professionals have seen an increase in attention from the board. So the challenge is, while boards are showing greater interest in compliance professionals are struggling to communicate these complex topics within the time frames that they have, if they get time at all. And as we all know, the board and the leadership team are constantly on the clock. The most effective way, therefore, to engage requires developing concise, compelling approaches that captures the board's attention, underscores the strategic value of the compliance function, so the board walk away far more smarter than they walked in and place far more value on the role of compliance and the compliance team who are safeguarding the business.
Expertise in any field is really kind of a matter of knowing like what matters and what doesn't matter. And if you think about like the best movie directors, all those guys are the best editors. Like they know what stuff they can cut out to tell that kind of a story. And I think I've seen a lot of people that I've coached who have, were prepping for a board meeting. There's this desire to kind of boil the ocean. And I think that's not the right approach. I think that's a way to kind of, keep yourself in, at that kiddie table or keep, that kind of stereotype that you might have kind of, that's going to make that a little bit more permanent. If you can really kind of boil down what's important and understand what the adversary, the board, the executive team, whatever, actually cares about, you have a much higher likelihood of having that impact in those short minutes that you have. Every single minute counts, just like in football, every single inch counts. I'm talking about American football, James. Every single inch counts. So we have to use the time that we have extremely well and, paint the right picture for those folks. If we're ever going to get more, we have to kind of prove ourselves.
Yeah. And I think, really knowing what matters to those people goes back again to the relationships. And, having spoken with them previous to walking into a board meeting and just understanding over time, what are their concerns? What are they worried about day in and day out? How do you support that? How do you help them see around those corners that they're struggling with? And what do they really need to know, from you in that meeting? So it's hard to work in a vacuum. And be really effective. It's, about getting out there and being a part of the larger strategic conversations so that you can bring that point of view in with you.
I love this topic. I mean, in case you can't tell, I'm very passionate about this new chapter we're stepping into. And to the extent that our job is shifting from knowing regulations to being experts at influence, I think there are other groups that we can borrow from to get better at what we're doing. And, sales is a great example. Salespeople are all about influencing someone else, making a connection, selling somebody something, right? And that's really what we're doing. We're selling compliance, or we're selling integrity to the organization. And I think the best salespeople, after every single, presentation, they will do some self-reflection and they'll say, what could I have done differently in that conversation? Did I misread the prospect? Did I not understand, was I unable to really understand what their pain was? Or was I really unable to make that connection with them? And I think when you can step out of yourself and consider yourself objectively in any kind of performance, your odds of improving are greatly increased, right? And so when we are making it a priority to build these relationships, that means we're making it a priority to have those connection points and have those kinds of conversations. A little bit of reflection. I'm not talking about an hour of journaling. I'm talking about 5 minutes to remind yourself, to build that muscle of assessing what kind of personality type this person has. What does this person care about, and really kind of tuning into it. That's a muscle that's very easy to build, but it just takes a little bit of intentionality and focus. So again, have that kind of salesperson mentality, have that, build that influence muscle with a little bit of self-reflection after your interactions. And I'm just telling you, within a month, you're going to see a total difference in what those interactions feel like and how those people start bringing you in sooner.
Yeah. Another thing
Julie just said, sorry, this is a great comment from Julie. Julie just said, thanks for this, Julie. The best way to do this is to find out what drives that individual. It helps determine how they will react to situations. You have to know your adversary. You have to know how they're wired and what they care most about if you're ever going to resonate with them,
Yeah, absolutely. We find too that, changing people's minds, having influence also has a lot to do with being able to help them understand the why behind what you're asking them to do. Listening to them first and understanding where they're coming from. But you also have to be able to say, here's what we need to do. Here's why we need to do it. Here's why it's so important to the business. Here's why it's so important to your team, to your customer, to you personally. And once people understand the why, then they can start to get behind the what, and the how of what you're asking. So there's an educational element in there that, goes a long way in bringing people along with you, especially if they're at the middle manager level, to help them understand, what is the job of the compliance function? How does it relate to the business and all the things that they are trying to achieve? And why is this going to help them get there? So all, the sort of the education along with the relationship building is a good combo.
So this is something that we hear a lot about kind of anecdotally, and the data kind of tells the same story. Compliance professionals remain sidelined in the decision-making process. So again, I'm looking at all this from a high agency, high responsibility, pulling responsibility into ourselves. It's on us. So we have to do something different to get into that decision-making process. So let's kind of dive into the findings in this aspect of the report.
Totally right, Nick. Again, I think as we think about how compliance professionals can take advantage of this opportunity to build relationships and ultimately communicate effectively with leadership, how do they feel currently about the decision-making process relating to key policy areas for their business? And actually, over the last year, many compliance professionals have seen an increase in their decision-making authority within their roles, reflecting a shift towards greater autonomy and operational responsibility as companies look to position around AI, cybersecurity, and ESG. But that said, many still find themselves sidelined with a limited mandate that does not extend to influencing the ultimate strategic direction of the business. And I think this is really quite clearly articulated here. It's a challenge that isn't a new one. In fact, the percentage of compliance professionals who had significant input in the strategic direction of their business has actually decreased since 2023. So why is this? I would suggest it all comes down to positioning. How do compliance professionals add value to these conversations? But let's go a step further than that. How can they set a vision for the future of compliance in their business? So they're seen as a critical voice around the table, a visionary, not simply a doer. And when you recall the areas where companies are focusing on right now for growth, be it AI, cybersecurity, ESG, the compliance team has a huge opportunity to not just play the game, but to establish the rules.
But again, it takes them believing that it is in their best interest to have us in those conversations. That's what it's going to come down to. Like, we can do it by mandate. We can, cajole the CEO into demanding that people contact us and bring us into conversations. That's only going to go so far. Look, I'm a co-CEO of this business. When I got that title, I didn't get like a magic new voice that when I speak, people do things. Like, people do things. People just kind of do whatever they want. Like, no one shows up here because I call them in the morning and demand that they come. It's a voluntary thing. And in this voluntary exchange that is business, we have to kind of frame ourselves in a way that people believe it's in their best interest to bring us in. And again, that's on us. That's on us to reframe, reconnect, reimagine what compliance can be inside of our companies. But again, until we do that, that line is going to stay the same. That 60% line that I keep talking about, and I'm going to keep talking about until I get a new data point, that's going to stay the same if we keep that kind of status quo thinking and that status quo approach.
And I want to give you sort of a simple tip, something that you can do here to try to reframe that story. And that is articulate the value proposition of what your team does. It is a very useful exercise. It can also be a really fun exercise, something that you can co-create with your team, by bringing everybody together into a workshop format and talking about, how do we align with the business? How do we help move the business forward? And exactly, in our jobs, how do we make that happen? And forming that into a story that you can then take out and tell people. And that's the other half of it. Once you've articulated your value proposition to the business, you have to go out there and evangelize it and make sure that you are telling that story. And just the very exercise of doing it can help your team believe it. And if you believe it, you can talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more people are going to hear it. And over time start to understand that, yes, you actually are a strategic part of the team and have a view that's important.
Look at this comment from Luciana. Luciana, thanks for sharing this. And listen for the key word here, mindset. It will never work while there is still an us and them mindset. And if you want to know what's happening in the business, or if you want to know what's happening or about to happen in the business, you have to go and ask. The answer is not in the big meetings, but on one-on-one interactions to understand where the company is going and where the pain points are. And then you'll find out where you can help. Nothing is more irritating for a senior leader than to ask, where can I help, without any specific focus. A round of applause for that. We can wrap up now. Just kidding. Let's keep going. Great comment.
No, it's so true, because people are usually not going to come to you, but you can go to them. You can have the one-on-one conversations. You can invite yourself into team meetings to talk about what you do and how it relates to their business, to ask them questions about their business. So yeah, absolutely agree that proactive mindset is key. What's next, James?
I think that that type of attitude is also incredibly important when you look at this slide. Because as we move into 2025, it is clear that compliance teams are facing numerous challenges, the biggest of which is a lack of resources to manage compliance programs. And there's also an increasing uncertainty around the regulatory burden and the rapid pace of regulatory change impacting companies, which in turn is, of course, making it increasingly difficult to effectively oversee these programs. And I think these challenges are further compounded by the heightened scrutiny from the regulators and external enforcement agencies, and also internal leaders, placing additional pressure on compliance professionals. So really, pressure is coming from every angle, from inside and outside the house. And it's becoming increasingly clear that compliance professionals are not only having to communicate internally, but there's now also an emerging requirement to pay far more attention to the outside voices and how do you communicate effectively to them as well. Interestingly, though, leadership's expectation for compliance leaders to present ROI has decreased. Now, perhaps this highlights compliance's shift from being a cost center to essential risk management. And in this new state, most organizations now focus on measuring the strength of their compliance framework. But Nick, I know you've got some good thoughts on ROI in particular here.
Well, I just think I think this graph here is interesting. On the right, it says pressure to demonstrate ROI, and only 19% have been asked by executive leadership to present ROI on their compliance program. So it doesn't ask how many of us on our own brought the ROI to the discussion. And I think this, we can infer a couple of things from this. I'm not sure if this is conclusive or not, but it looks like that dropped significantly. And I would just wonder why. Is that because we've stopped talking about it? Is that because they don't think that we are good at articulating it? What is it? In my mind, like if we zoom out of this and you can just kind of reference the Ethisphere list that comes out every year. Ethisphere does this world's most ethical companies list, and every single year they put a stock chart for all those composite companies and compare that to another basket of the rest of the market. And in every single year that I've seen this thing, the line for the most ethical companies is above the rest of the market. So that implies that the more ethical a company is, it exhibits some kind of an ethical premium. So my point is, we have to have the confidence to, if that's true, if there is an ethical premium potential that exists in some companies out there that is statistically significant, well, then we have to have the confidence of pulling some of that premium into any conversation that we're having. That takes a little creativity. That takes a little bit of a desire to persuade and a desire to have that kind of a conversation and reframe what we're doing for the benefit of the broader organization. But I'm just saying, I see a lot of people come to these conversations talking about a tool for compliance, when in actuality, to the extent that compliance is a circulatory system for the organization, that tool is for the benefit of the organization. And so what I'm saying is, if we can grab some of that premium and we can incorporate that into whatever initiative we're pushing forward, and we ourselves can bring the ROI discussion to the conversation, irrespective of whether we are, asked by leadership to incorporate it, we can very quickly get things unstuck, and we very quickly can show that, hey, we're a business person just like you. We're not apart from the business. We're a part of the business. I understand what you care about. I understand the language you speak and how you want to look at things, and I'm going to go ahead and speak that language. So again, if only 20% of us, for whatever reason, are bringing ROI to the discussion, there's a massive opportunity to bring a lot more ROI to that discussion. Again, I understand that it's a bit of a challenge for a second or a third line type of operation to show the second and third order impact, which is maybe the bottom line impact of the things that we're doing. But again, you can always go back to that ethical premium, and if that exists, well, then it's on us to bring that into the conversation.
Yeah, I know, it can be hard to measure ROI in what all of us do, including, what James and I do in communications, but there are ways to connect it. But one really great way to measure your ROI in compliance is to measure your compliance culture. That's something that you can't do with just a couple of extra questions on the employee engagement survey, because you won't get enough information. But you can do a dedicated compliance culture assessment, get a benchmark, and get a lot of insights into where the problems lie so that you can address them specifically. And we've seen companies have a lot of success doing that just in one cycle of doing the measurement and then applying the learnings and then remeasuring and seeing a big jump in improvement against that benchmark. And, that's a solid data-based score. That does speak to, the return on the investment you made in all the operational pieces of your program. So that's something to consider. It's not all that hard. It doesn't take all that long. A little bit of time and effort, but it's well worth it, and really is a true measure.
I started doing these return on integrity coaching sessions where I get together with a compliance person who's maybe looking for more budget or more headcount, and I help them kind of craft a persuasion path to get what they need. I've done dozens of these now. Over 90% have been successful. And I'm just saying, I've never not been able to come up with some value. It's out there. It's either out there, it either exists or it doesn't exist. We're either just, moving rocks around the yard, something that's super inconsequential, or the things we do actually matter. And I'm just saying, if they matter, we should be able to, frame out what the impact for the organization is with a couple of basic assumptions. So if anybody's interested in that, Ethicsverse members in particular, happy to do it. I just think there's so much power in speaking ROI. We can always calculate it. We can always find, we can always make a credible case for the ROI of what we're doing. To your point, Angie, it takes a little creativity. It takes a little bit of work, but we got to pick locks. That's what our job is. Our job is charming snakes and picking locks, okay? And every snake can be charmed and every lock can be picked, okay?
And you'll get a lot of credit as a business person for
exactly
talking about ROI and thinking about ROI.
And you're going to break that pattern. They have some conception of you. There's some stereotype that we're stepping into. It's on us to break that mold. You know what I mean?
I would say as well, I feel like across all business functions, there is one universal language, and it's ROI. Now, if you can explain it, if you can articulate it, if you can deliver it, you really do elevate the role and the function at large. And it's really actually articulated again on this slide, to Angie's point, as these pressures increase, it's going to be even more important to identify the best ways to track and measure a program's effectiveness. And for example, there are 3 key ways here that our respondents pointed out, which they see particularly effective. The first there is establishing a whistleblower hotline and tracking the number of reported potential compliance violations. Nearly 70% flagged that as the top way to measure compliance effectiveness. The second actually relates to testing employee retention of knowledge after a compliance session or an educational assessment. How do we really know someone's walking away with knowledge or just clicking through the buttons? Very important thing to distinguish. And the third, actually, with all these in mind, is looking at the number of actual compliance violations that were detected against those that were reported. And again, you can see the clear programmatic challenges on the right of the slide there that are underpinning all this necessity to take action now.
Something some of our kind of forward-thinking clients have been doing to kind of achieve quote-unquote effectiveness is really using corrective action plans. So attaching a corrective action plan to any report, any substantiated report that is essentially a checklist or for the things that have to be done, because many times the end of an investigation is not the end of something, it's the start of something. There's something that has to be done. There's a loop that has to be closed. So by consistently mitigating that risk with these checklists, these corrective action plans based on, issue type or, violation type, gives you some great data very quickly to prove like, hey, these risks came up, all these risks have been mitigated consistently, and now I have data around it to prove it. Again, we have to push our industry forward. We have to push our impact forward, and that's going to come from making small tweaks. So what can you do to solve this effectiveness question for yourself, not for the, the phantasm that is, the lurking DOJ coming in to scrutinize your program. Solve it for yourself and figure out ways that you can, again, gain some inches and recognize that effectiveness is not a destination that you're ever going to arrive at. It's a path of continuous improvement that you need to enjoy the journey on,
Yeah, and I can't help but notice that those top 3 measures are all quite quantitative. It's really important to look at the qualitative too. How well are we doing at influencing people, at changing perceptions, at changing behaviors? That's that culture piece, and really, measuring what's happening and getting the insights into why so that you can act on it to get that qualitative piece in there too.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah.
Also to that point, Angie, I think this thing of mosaic theory really applies here. So mosaic theory is, if you zoom in on a single tile of a mosaic, you have no idea what that picture is. But if you step back, you can see how all these tiles kind of come together to form a picture. You don't have to relegate your, effectiveness test, to your point, to just quantitative measures. You can form a mosaic and come to a reasonable conclusion with the accumulation of all these different data points, some quantitative, some qualitative, to present and say, I think there's a reasonable, I think effectiveness or effectiveness improvement is a reasonable conclusion given this picture of this, cadre or this bouquet of data points. So give yourself a little bit of grace and give yourself a little bit of freedom. And again, if you're solving it for yourself, your mind is naturally running algorithms constantly, finding the patterns across all different types of data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And so again, I think if we're trying to solve for ourselves, it really gives us a lot more freedom to look objectively at what's coming down the pike or what data points we have around us and test those in kind of a quasi-scientific way to ensure that we are generating the improvement to our program and the improvement toward this this elusive destination of effectiveness along the way.
And actually, that sees us very well. I think the importance of addressing those challenges of running an effective compliance program, making sure you're on the right path, clearly shows up here. We found that 77% are not completely prepared to address a potential compliance incident, despite the number of reported compliance incidents either remaining steady or actually having increased over the past year. I'm going to pause there for a second because I think that's a pretty compelling data point.
Yeah, what's your reaction to that, Angie?
Yeah, I think, people just need to really understand that they play a critical role in helping companies understand what the risks and requirements of certain strategic decisions are, as well as enabling the business to manage those risks. So again, getting into those discussions, it's more important now than ever with all these new things coming at us, AI in particular. So again, and we've been beating this drum for the last hour, but how do you frame the value of your expertise differently? How do you get into those conversations and build the relationships you need to have that kind of influence?
Yeah, and just again, getting back to this continuous improvement concept, perfection is never going to happen. Being totally prepared, having a perfect program is never going to happen. It's really about how can I get a little bit more prepared? How can I take this Pareto approach or this 80-20 rule approach to viewing my program and viewing my business and taking some incremental steps forward to get us a little bit more prepared? You know what I'm saying? There's fire suppression that you can put inside of a warehouse that might not stop a fire from ever starting, but it can, stop it from being as bad as it otherwise could be, right? What are some of those kind of fire suppression system things that you can do within your organization to get yourself a little bit more prepared for a compliance incident? But I think to your point, Angie, when we're properly framed inside the organization, the odds of us getting the buy-in and getting the behavior changes that lead to higher preparedness are going to be a lot higher. If we're not doing that, then this is not going to change at all the next time we do this, Well,
and I think too, just carrying on your metaphor, of the fire, the earlier you can get the warning, the better you're going to be able to deal with the fire. And if you're not part of the conversations, you may not get that warning until the fire's already off and running.
So this is a real bright spot on the right side of this graph, the likelihood to recommend. This is essentially a net promoter score, metric across a few different aspects of the compliance program. So respondents were asked, would you recommend joining the compliance team at your organization? There was a pretty good increase of promoters there, up to 30%. Would you recommend joining your organization? Again, a slight increase to about 25%. And would you recommend adopting your organization's compliance program? That was a slight increase, but a little bit less than the jumps we saw in the other two questions. So what do you think the big takeaways are here? And what do you think, what opportunity does this present? So good little kind of movement in the proportion of respondents that were promoters, but I'd like to see this to be 80%. I'd like, that dark bar to be 80% across all three of these questions.
And Nick, to be honest, I'd love to see, in particular, that detractor number. I'd really like to see how do we chip away at some of those significant percentages there. How do we
Yeah.
move those who are rating it between 0 and 6 into the 7 and 8s? How do we get the 7 and 8s mobilized, energized, enthusiastic to rate 9 and 10s?
That's right.
That's the real transition. That's the real path, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that detractor side. But again, the respondents are compliance officers. So what's going on inside your program that, if you're a detractor, if you would answer these questions in the negative, where you wouldn't recommend someone joining your organization or joining your compliance team, or you wouldn't recommend your program to be kind of overlaid on somebody else, what are the main things that would need to change in order for you to be a promoter? That's a decent place to start driving change within your own program. Like many times the answer is already in us. Like many times we already kind of know the answer, but again, it's going to take some initiative. It's going to take some intentionality to get this stuff unstuck.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to take that mindset shift that we talked about earlier and changing some of our own behaviors,
That's
and
right.
how we spend our time day to day. I mean, we've all had times when we're not thrilled about our job, but you can either do something about it or not, or you will do something about it. You might leave and go to another job, or you might change the way you're doing things at your job. But that's kind of all on us as individuals, to step up and figure out what we can do to make things better.
All right, we got a couple of minutes here, so I'd like to hit a couple more slides before we can. While I still have everybody, though, you guys got to show up next Thursday. We got the one and only Rebecca Rem coming. We have Matt Kelly, coolest guy in compliance, coming, and we're going to be talking about behavioral science techniques from a bunch of different books that you can put into practice. So if you haven't seen Rebecca before, she's phenomenal. You're going to really love this session next Thursday at noon Eastern. Coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. All right. So we see a noticeable trend towards increased investment in compliance, which is phenomenal. So let's walk these findings.
Yeah, I think this is a real sign of continual shoots of optimism. Over the last year in particular, more than 2 in 5 professionals reported that the budget for compliance functions, which obviously includes tools, technology, personnel, it's grown. And it's projected to continue on an upward trajectory in the short term and the medium term. So this is a really, really positive, strong, and hopeful slide. But thinking again in the theme of change and owning the game, impacting the game, how can compliance professionals have a greater say in what this increase looks like, and what should they spend it on to ensure that investment continues and is also protected from other allocations as well? How can professionals ultimately continue to stress the importance of fixing the roof while the sun is shining?
I love that analogy. When you hear me say that, when you hear me say that in the future, James, just know that there's an implied asterisk crediting you, because I love that. Sorry, I cut you off, Angie.
No, I also was very impressed with that.
He's an impressive guy,
He is. I think it goes back to a lot of the things we've talked about. How do you have the influence to make sure that you're getting the resources you need? ROI, relationships, mindsets. I think it's a great sort of summary slide for a lot of the things that we've talked about today.
Yeah.
And maybe I can just bring it full circle here, Nick. I think ultimately the key to answering those allocation issues and ensuring continued investment really is going to ultimately come down to ensuring compliance professionals find new ways to articulate their value. So right now, compliance professionals often have limited control of their program's budget. Again, similar to what we saw in the previous wave of research. What we're seeing here is that funding decisions are spread across multiple executives: the CEO, the board, the GC, CFO. And this really is a great opportunity right here. It's some of the most senior figures in any business are sitting around the table discussing compliance. Yep. They are looking to understand how and what to prioritize. And you see that if compliance professionals can step up and fill that information void, articulate their value through the work and the vision they have for the compliance function, it really would elevate the importance of compliance and help redefine the role for all those who carry it.
Yeah, and here's your to-do list. These are the people that you need to influence. So, figure out who this is in your organization or who these couple of folks are, and just assume that you have, that you're subject to that stereotype and you got to break it. You have to pun intended, I guess, we have to reimagine what we are and who we are within our organization. And we have to help our adversaries in the organization reimagine what our impact is. If we're not going to take the initiative to drive that reframe, then it's all going to stay the same. And 10 years from now, you're going to look back and you're going to say, wow, the last 10 years looked like the 10 years prior to that. Nobody wants that. We want to leave the world better. We want to make an impact in our organization. We want to build these authentic cultures of integrity. And we can't wait on the porch for all the lights into town to turn green for us to get into our car. We got to get in the car and we got to start going. We got to start making some of those incremental steps. And so when we step into this year, we wanted to do this early in the year. When we step into this year, this should feel like a shot in the arm. You should feel excited about the opportunity in front of you, because I can tell you that the things that we do, they matter. They matter to our organization. They matter to the people who are looking to work in our organization. They matter to the market. They matter to the bottom line. And it's on us to shine some light on what we're doing so that people can see, oh my gosh, this isn't the office of no. These folks are here to make me do my job better and help me do my job better. So with that, we're a couple minutes over. Love you all. One more round of applause for the FTI folks, James and Angie. This was really a phenomenal report. Almost 3,000 emojis. Let's end this with a massive wash of emojis. No one's had lunch yet. And we will see you next week for a behavioral science special, diving deep with Rebecca and Matt. See you next Thursday.